Man, know thyself. The spirit, when incarnate, has three functions. It is split into three operative parts, all having a common root. This is why it is in the vast majority of cases devoid of any past memories so far as the conscious mind is concerned. These three parts operate thus. Through the higher self, the middle self, and the lower or astral self. They function as follows. That part of the spirit which operates the lower or material self has, whilst incarnate, the work of supporting the mortal body. It produces the magnetic force necessary to sustain the life of the material body. Thus, if this part of the spirit is weak or lazy, the body will become sick and diseased. As I have explained in an earlier chapter, the true spiritual healer will heal through the fact that he stimulates the lower spiritual to reach out and absorb the vital magnetic force, and thus the process of mortal disease is arrested. If the patient's spiritual awareness is awakened, the cure will be permanent and not just a re-stimulation when the boosting power of the healer is present. The reason why incarnate spirits generally do not have memory of their past existences is because the root of karmic memory is in that portion of the spirit which rules the middle self. Until the door is opened between the consciousness of the lower self and the middle self, there can be no collaboration between these two spiritual parts. The individual will not recognize any karmic responsibilities and will be unaware of the higher spiritual force within, which it can contact with advantage. Footnote 1. This explains why people under anesthetics have been known to talk languages of which they have no knowledge. The barrier between the lower self-consciousness and the middle self-consciousness is removed, allowing a previous incarnate consciousness to be uncovered. Much so-called psychic phenomena is the product of this lower self, which has various potentialities. The memory stored within the lower self is the only memory of present incarnate existence, which, when the lower and middle selves are in accord, at physical death joins itself onto the middle self of the discarnating spirit and enters the storehouse of the soul. It enables the enlightened seeker to profit by past experiences and advance along the pathway to cosmic atonement. When this state is arrived at and the three spiritual parts act in concert as one complete whole, then cosmic consciousness is reached. As I have said, the lower self has the function of recharging and sustaining the physical body. It also serves the brain, which is the storehouse of incarnate existence. The memory or card index system, bringing forward when required what has been correlated by the physical brain cells. This lower self cannot reason but must call upon the middle self to dissect the subject matter placed before it by the lower self. Thus we see that if the middle self is not called in for judgment upon the lower self's ideas, the individual will be one of whom we would say they just have no common sense or reasoning powers. In other words, they are the types too often met with who accept anything out of hand which presents itself to them. The middle self has reasoning, power, and memory. The memory of all karmic experiences right up to our present incarnations. You may say, if this is the case, then why is it that discarnate spirits very seldom admit reincarnation? The answer seems simple if we analyze it carefully. If these two selves, the lower and the middle, have not worked together while it's incarnate, then there will still be a barrier existent between them when in the discarnate state, and the astral body, which is the vehicle of the lower self, and its etheric counterpart will still be unaware of its karmic experiences, only knowing that one from which it has just passed. In fact, many who are precipitated into the astral without spiritual knowledge of any sort do not even realize that they have passed over and try to vainly contact those they have known upon earth. When they again incarnate, they are housed in a physical body, having a new brain, which will, as the physical storehouse, only know those things which it learns in its new body. The experiences of its previous lives will have gone to join the middle self memory, which, as we have said, stores all past karmic experiences. It will only be those spirits who have coordinated these three spiritual aspects who will be conscious of those wider vistas outside their last mortal existence. Do not mistake my meaning. I do not wish to infer that they will necessarily know the exact circumstances of previous karmas, but they will recognize in frustration and adversity a purpose, and by so doing will be able to work out its solution. Then we come to the higher self. This is the cosmic consciousness within. This self knows everything, has memory, reasoning, and something which the two others have not, creative power. Thus, if we wish to be successful in our earthly undertakings, we must have contact with this higher self, which will make our ideas become positive facts. Let me here make quite clear a most important factor. When I speak of the lower, middle, and higher selves, I do not mean to imply aspects of good or evil. I merely use the terms as spiritual divisions or compartments to show how they function with one another. Again, the question poses itself, how is it then that evil seems to triumph to the exclusion of good? Evil does not triumph in the long run, and when we argue in this manner, we are only, by our limited understanding, assuming that the begin all and end all of life is this finite physical existence we are at present conscious of. If we try to force the higher self to aid us in schemes which are anti-spiritual in fact and motive, then we are courting disaster and increasing karma on the debit side. So we can see that before we make demands upon the higher or creative self, we must do so with the full knowledge and cooperation of the middle self. If not, we shall be meddling with the force that will destroy us if we use it for self and ignore the promptings and reasoning of the middle self, which must be allowed to control and dictate to the lower self. In these cases of blind demanding, it is the higher self or God consciousness, which calls upon the reasoning power of the middle self. But if the lower physical self, which is without reasoning powers, is too strongly entrenched and not in harmony with the middle self, then reason is thrown to the winds and we carry through our project in face of all opposition, not caring whom we hurt or even physically destroy, so long as we gain our own selfish desires. Often we speak of our conscience, which is in fact the still small voice of the God within us enshrined in the higher self. It calls out pleadingly, imploring us to stop and think before it is too late, often to be stifled by the mortal physical desires prompting our demands, whatever they may be. In other words, we have free will, which can either be used for the achievement of spiritual atonement, or we can plunge into the vortex of materialism, thus building up fresh karmic debts, which have to be worked out upon earth, the scene of our past crimes against spirituality. I saw it written recently that the doctrine of reincarnation was retrogressive. What nonsense. Anybody taking thus merely displays his ignorance. Reincarnation only spells frustration for those who will not seek the higher spiritual knowledge. By their failure to know themselves, they plunge into error after error, forcing themselves to return again and again to earth's schoolrooms until they have, by their own striving and humility, come to the footstool of knowledge and understanding, when they will be free to go forward to realms of knowledge, as yet unexplored. In simple language, we are our own gaolers. Now I want to return for a moment to that aspect of the spirit which I have called the lower self. It produces a supply of all those necessities which are essential for the spirit to manifest when incarnate. It is that part of the force within us which is responsible for much of the phenomena erroneously written down as spirit communication. This lower self, which for simplicity's sake I will call X, is the manufacturer of vital force, which, as I have already said, sustains the physical body. According to the supply of this vital force, so will the physical be either healthy or diseased. The body grows old and decays because this vital force gradually weakens if not exercised. It finally withdraws itself altogether at physical death. X can be trained in a number of ways so that objects can be moved around and things that are apparently unknown to ourselves be described. This of course requires practice, although some individuals have an X force, which operates almost naturally and without much training. Everything must be developed, whatever it may be. I will take the art of singing, being a singer myself. It takes years and years of careful daily study and practice to achieve anything like perfection, which actually is never reached. That is why we strive onwards, always seeking this elusive goal. When I practice, I have something talking to me most of the time, telling me what to do, and it always proves to be correct. Mediums have suggested that it is a spirit of a deceased singer guiding me. Actually, this is not so. I have, with years of practice, trained my X-force to such an extent in this particular field that my middle self is able to work with X, who asks it questions to which it replies, causing a collateral physical reaction. The act of singing is initially spiritual, and the sound I wish to emit must be accurately conveyed by my spiritual ear to my brain. This materializes the required sound through the physical medium of the vocal cords, producing an audible note or succession of notes making a tune. This X-force is also responsible for telepathy and, in a great many cases, poltergeists. These latter can mostly be pinned down to some abnormality or very strong urge, which has been frustrated in the individual. In fact, persons have been consigned to mental establishments because of the physical happenings which manifest in their presence. What actually takes place is that rods of ectoplasm are projected, which automatically relieve the frustrated feelings of the individual by moving or throwing things about. I know a case in point which happened to me years ago and which resulted in such a physical manifestation. Actually, the person responsible for the occurrence thought it was a spirit influence, and although only a child of some 5 years, said so. Footnote 1. A vase was thrown at me across a space of about 20 feet without any apparent human agency. He was angry and frustrated because I would not take any notice of him at the particular time he wanted attention. In later years, this theory was proven by the fact that physical manifestations do at intervals take place in his presence, which both he and his wife are aware of. He has a very strong physical X-force. That is why he can invariably get what he wants in life without any difficulty. X manifests as personality. If it is strong and virile, it will push itself out and attempt to overwhelm the X-force of anybody whom it may wish to influence. If it is weak, then it becomes overwhelmed itself, and the opposing individual will superimpose his will. This is where introspection steps in, and we manufacture a persecution complex thinking that all the world is against us. In reality, it is we ourselves who are our own enemies. We should train this X-force to go out into the world and do some positive work for us. Nature gives us the tools, but if we will not besteer ourselves to them, the blame is ours. So that you may the more easily be able to distinguish these three spiritual forces within us, I suggest that we think of them in future as X, the lower self, the physical administrator, Y, the middle self or reasoning force, and Z, the God force, known as Zen to the Orient. Do not fall into the error of thinking that I am discounting communication with spiritual forces. I am not. What I do say most emphatically is that in the great majority of cases, this so-called communication is nothing more than the X-force taking control. The perfect mediumship can only be achieved when X, Y, and Z all work in harmony. Then the door of communication with the higher self is open, and the information obtained will be of a really lofty and instructive nature. It will be a reaching out to the God consciousness or Z force, and because the Y or reasoning force no longer questions or tries to block the flow of knowledge by forming a barrier in between, the higher spiritual beings will be able to contact us inspirationally, and the knowledge added to our own will be constructive and helpful. Much harm is done by promiscuous and unguided contact with astral or earthbound spirits who have failed to learn their earthly lessons and so must have further schooling upon earth. These spirits delight in making contact with incarnates and are often not what they profess to be. Actually, what they do is pick out through telepathy what the earthly inquirer wants to know. They contact the inquirer's X-force, which is the storehouse of all present physical experiences and memories. Having done this, it is quite simple to impersonate people known to the inquirer who have passed on. The contact may not even get this far, and the inquirer and the medium, if one is consulted, will simply play a game of foils with their two X-forces. Both will be quite unconscious of what is taking place, and the messages will be accepted as coming forth from a friend, relative, etc. Much of what I have said on spirit communication will, I am quite sure, arouse criticism. If so, then I can only say that it is caused by a latent fear that deep-rooted ideas may be upset. After all, we should strive after the truth as opposed to sensation, even if it does knock the bottom out of some of our most cherished beliefs. If we are not strong enough to admit when we are misled, then we shall never attain to any of the greater knowledge. It is only through trial and error that we at last come to real spiritual understanding. The exploration of ourselves and our possible contacts with spiritual forces requires much courage. The path is stony and often lonely. We raise up abuse and antagonism, both of which are born of fear that we are going to upset somebody's preconceived notions. All we can do is forge ahead to the best of our ability, looking neither to the right nor to the left. We must be honest with ourselves and with others, speaking fearlessly of those things which we honestly believe to be the truth, even if it gets us into hot water. Spirituality cannot be put under the microscope, but is an essence, and once we have made its contact, we know. It joins itself to that God consciousness within. We have unlocked the doors of God's house and can pass through its portals at will. Relying upon ourselves alone to make our contact with God without the necessity of any intermediary. Jesus said, "Man, know thyself, and seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you."